A forgotten letter, hidden for decades, has just resurfaced, and it shattered Prince William. Written by Princess Diana in her final months, this emotional message reveals secrets, warnings, and a mother's undying love. What did it say? And why did it leave the future king in tears? Let's uncover the truth. Discovery of the lost letter. It all started with a quiet restoration project deep inside one of the royal archives. Among dusty boxes and forgotten belongings, a royal staff member stumbled upon a faded envelope tucked inside a book that once belonged to Princess Diana. The handwriting across it was instantly familiar, graceful, slanted, and unmistakably Diana's. The name on the front was simple, handwritten in blue ink: William. The envelope looked worn. The paper had turned yellowish with age, and the corners were bent, almost fragile. The ink was slightly smudged, as if someone had touched it with trembling fingers or tears. No one knew how long it had been sitting there, untouched and unread. But the moment it was discovered, the mood shifted. This wasn't just paper. This was history, locked in ink. Initial reactions were mixed. Some palace aides were cautious, wondering if it was genuine. Others were visibly shaken. The letter was quietly handed over to experts, including a handwriting analyst and a royal archivist. They studied it carefully, comparing it to other known letters from Diana. The ink, the style, even the kind of stationery, it all matched. There was no doubt. This was real. Once verified, the letter was passed up the chain. Palace advisors and Diana's former confidants were alerted. It wasn't something that could be made public. Not yet. Too delicate, too emotional, and too powerful. When Prince William was told, insiders say he stood completely still for several seconds. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. Then, with shaking hands, he asked to be alone. What happened next was heartbreaking. William took the letter into a private room, away from cameras and advisors. No one followed. But those who saw him emerge say his face had changed. Pale, tight-jawed, silent. One source said, he looked like someone who'd seen a ghost. The letter didn't just reopen memories, it reopened wounds. It was as if Diana had reached through time, through silence, and whispered something that shook her son to his core. "She's gone," said one royal aide, "but with that letter, she spoke again." And she went straight to the heart. This discovery wasn't just about emotion. It triggered questions. Why was the letter hidden? Who had kept it from William for so long? And more importantly, what did it say? And that brings us to the contents of the letter. The part that left the future king holding back tears as the truth unfolded word by word. The hidden contents revealed. The letter began in a tone that was instantly familiar, warm, honest, and full of love. Diana had always written with her heart, and this message was no exception. The opening lines weren't formal. They were gentle, personal. She wrote to "My darling William," and from there, her voice came alive on the page. She didn't waste words. She went straight into her fears. Diana expressed deep concern about the pressures her son would face as he got older. Media intrusion, royal duty, emotional isolation. She said she worried that he'd lose himself in the role, that the crown might take more from him than it gave. She spoke of her regrets, things she wished she'd said, moments she hoped he remembered, and hopes she carried for him. She apologized for the pain he may have felt during her public battles and private heartbreaks. She wrote, I know you've seen things a child never should, and I hope you never carry my sorrow as your own." Then came the chilling part. Diana warned him to be cautious of certain people, some close, some very close. She never named names directly, but the phrasing was clear. She urged him to trust his instincts and to protect the ones he loves fiercely, especially the woman you choose to walk beside you. Many believe this was a direct message about Catherine. She also hinted at being followed, watched, and manipulated in ways the public never knew. "If anything happens to me," she wrote, "know that I was not careless." That line sent shivers through William's spine. But perhaps the most powerful sentence came at the end. "You were my light in the darkest hours, and if you're reading this, it means the truth has found its way back to you." It wasn't just a letter. It was a lifeline. A mother's last attempt to prepare her son for a life she feared she wouldn't see him live. What Diana left behind in that letter wasn't just emotion. It was insight. It was warning. And it was love sharpened by pain. And for William, reading it wasn't just painful. It was life-changing. The breakdown that followed was something no royal title could shield him from. Why Diana wrote it, her motivation. Diana didn't write this letter casually. It wasn't something she jotted down in a moment of reflection. It was deliberate, emotional, and born out of a deep sense of urgency. At the time this letter was likely written, her life was spiraling into unfamiliar territory. She was already divorced from Prince Charles. She had been stripped of her Royal Highness title. And although she was no longer officially part of the monarchy, she still carried the weight of being the mother to the future king. That alone gave her both power and fear. Those close to her during this period say she was restless, even anxious. She had grown increasingly suspicious of the systems around her. Diana knew she was being watched, monitored, manipulated. She feared she didn't have much time left to say what truly mattered. And that's where the letter came in. She needed to speak to her son, not as a princess or public figure, but as a mother who loved him deeply, and who worried he was walking into the same cruel machinery that had almost destroyed her. Her interviews from that time paint a clear picture. Diana often hinted that her life was at risk, that powerful forces were uncomfortable with her independence and global popularity. She was no longer willing to play the royal game quietly. She started supporting causes that made the establishment uncomfortable. She was dating outside the palace's preferences, and more than anything, she was speaking too freely. Writing to William may have been her last safe move. She couldn't say these things out loud. She couldn't publish them. But a private letter? That was her only remaining lifeline, a way to warn him without endangering him, or herself, any more than she already had. In the letter, she poured out her thoughts, not just about him, but about the life he was about to face. She spoke of the burdens of royalty, of public performance, of not being allowed to show weakness. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She knew what it meant to live under the palace roof, where emotions were managed like protocol, and pain had to be buried beneath etiquette. It wasn't a letter full of royal advice. It was filled with protective instinct, warnings, hopes, a mother trying to shield her son in the only way she could. She didn't trust those around her to look after him. She didn't trust the system to guide him. She wanted her voice to reach him beyond her death. "You don't owe them your soul," she wrote. "Stay kind. Stay close to your heart. And don't let the crown turn it cold." That line stayed with William. It would resurface again when he read the letter. And what happened next proved just how deeply those words cut. William's emotional breakdown. No one expected the future King of England to fall apart. But the moment Prince William read his mother's lost letter, the weight of it cracked something inside him. According to insiders, he had taken it to a quiet drawing room in one of the royal estates, away from aides, away from press, and most importantly, away from expectation. Alone, he unfolded the paper and began to read. At first, he sat still, silent. But within minutes, his eyes welled up. The deeper into the letter he went, the more his face shifted. What started as surprise turned to heartbreak. By the end, he wasn't just emotional. He was visibly shaken. His breathing changed. His hands trembled. One of his most trusted aides, standing just outside the door, later said, "I heard nothing at first. Then I heard a sound I never thought I'd hear from him, a choked sob." For William, this wasn't just grief. It was a collision of past and present. Every word in that letter ripped open memories he had spent years trying to live beyond. He saw his mother again, not the global icon, not the press sensation, but the woman who tucked him in at night, who bent down to his level when others towered above him, who held his hand when cameras weren't looking. The letter reminded him of everything he lost at 15. The childhood joy, the emotional safety, the mother who tried to protect him even when she couldn't protect herself. Her voice on the page wasn't distant. It was alive, real, and for a moment, it was like she was right there with him. But it wasn't just sadness that overwhelmed him. It was guilt, anger, and confusion. Why had this letter been hidden? Who kept it from him? And why now, after nearly 3 decades, was it suddenly in his hands? The royal institution had always managed grief in silence. Emotions were kept behind closed doors. But this letter broke that wall down completely. He was later joined by a close confidant, someone who found him still seated in that room, his eyes red, the letter lying open in his lap. They didn't speak for several minutes. Finally, William whispered something that caught even the confidant off guard. "She saw it all. She knew. And I wasn't ready to hear it, until now." What followed wasn't a royal statement or a press release. William didn't speak publicly, but those close to him said something had changed. He became quieter, more intense. He asked to review old archives. He wanted to revisit memories. The letter had stirred something powerful and deeply painful. It was the moment the monarchy's future king was no longer just the polished prince. He was a son again, a grieving son, face to face with the words his mother had left behind, and the legacy she had passed down in silence. The letter's warnings and predictions. As William slowly regained his composure, he returned to the letter and read it again, this time more carefully. And the second time, something shifted. Beneath the warmth and motherly love, he began to see what Diana was truly trying to say. Her letter was not just emotional. It was prophetic. Diana had always been known for her intuition, and in this letter, that instinct was chillingly accurate. She warned William of the pressures that would come with being a future king, not just from the public or the press, but from within his own family. She wrote about smiles that don't reach the eyes and loyalties that shift in silence. William immediately knew who she meant. One passage in particular stood out. Diana warned her son to be cautious around people who may appear supportive but serve the crown more than they serve truth. She urged him to protect his wife, whoever she might be, with everything he had. She feared that what happened to her could happen again, in a more modern, quieter form. That fear now felt hauntingly close to reality. Even more shocking was a subtle reference to his younger brother. Diana didn't speak negatively about Harry, but she did mention that there would come a time when the two would be pulled in different directions by people with different visions. She pleaded with William to stay close to his brother, to resist the machine that might turn them into symbols rather than sons. As William read that, it felt like a dagger to the heart. He had watched his bond with Harry deteriorate over the years. Words had been said, lines had been drawn, and now, in Diana's own hand, was a plea for unity, written long before the feud began. She also spoke of public betrayal, that one day he might feel alone even in a crowded room, and that some betrayals wouldn't come from strangers, but from those standing just behind him. "When you feel most loved by the world," she wrote, "look behind the curtain." That's where the danger lies. William couldn't ignore how much of it had already come true. The tensions, the isolation, the strained relationships. Diana had seen it all coming, and she had tried, in her own quiet way, to prepare him. "If I could give you anything," she wrote, "it would be the power to see through the mask." By the time he reached the final line again, William wasn't just heartbroken. He was on edge. This wasn't just a letter from the past, it was a warning for the future. And now, with its words exposed, the palace had a much bigger problem than grief. It had a prophecy unfolding in real time. Repercussions inside the palace. When news of the letter's discovery and its contents reached the palace, it was like a quiet earthquake. No alarms, no sirens, just a sudden shift in atmosphere. Behind closed doors, everything changed. Royal aides, advisors, and even senior family members knew immediately that this was not something they could control. The first reaction was containment. Who had seen the letter? Where was it now? Could it leak? A private meeting was quickly assembled, and the focus was clear. Minimize exposure, control the narrative, and most importantly, keep William silent. But it was already too late. The emotional fallout from William's side had created ripples across the inner circle. Those who saw him in the hours after reading it described a man who had become colder, more focused, and unwilling to play the traditional royal script. He wasn't demanding a media campaign or a public tribute. He wanted answers. And for the first time in years, he wasn't asking for permission to go looking. Some inside the palace saw this as a serious threat. Not because William was acting irrationally, but because he was asking the kind of questions that had long been buried. Why hadn't he received the letter sooner? Who kept it hidden? And what else had been left out from Diana's legacy? There was also fear that the letter could be used against the monarchy. If it ever went public, the language inside could ignite a storm, especially the warnings about betrayal, silence, and family tensions. PR teams scrambled to prepare statements just in case, but none were released. Instead, the palace opted for the oldest tactic in its book: silence. Internally, conversations grew tense. It was said that Camilla was deeply unsettled by the letter's resurfacing, especially given the emotional weight it placed back on Diana's memory. Charles reportedly stayed out of view, issuing no comment and attending to private matters. But those close to him say he was visibly shaken when he learned what was written. Historians and royal biographers began to catch wind of the situation. Some requested access to archives. Others speculated that there were more letters, more private messages Diana had written, and that the palace may have buried or ignored. The pressure began to mount, not from outside, but from within the royal ranks themselves. "We've built a fortress," said one palace staffer, "but sometimes the ghosts slip through the cracks." What had started as a personal discovery now threatened to become a public reckoning. And as William quietly pulled away from internal meetings and stepped into his own silence, the palace knew the clock had started ticking. What would he do next? And more importantly, who would follow him? The public reaction and media storm. The moment whispers of Diana's lost letter reached the public, the media turned it into a global frenzy. No official statement had been made, no confirmation released. But it didn't matter. The idea alone was enough to set fire to headlines. "Diana speaks from the grave," screamed one outlet. Another read, "Secret letter leaves Prince William in tears." Across social media, the response was immediate and emotional. Thousands of users shared old photos of Diana and William, recalling her unmatched warmth and the unfairness of her loss. People didn't just want to know what the letter said. They wanted to protect it, to shield it from being twisted, buried, or denied. For many, it became a symbol of truth in a royal institution that too often seemed cold and calculated. But it also reignited anger. The letter's resurfacing reminded the world of how Diana had been treated. The silence, the suffering, the tabloid harassment, and the loneliness. Now, with her own words confirming fears about betrayal, pressure, and being silenced, public frustration boiled over. Why had this letter been hidden? Who kept it from William? And how many more messages had been buried with her? The press began speculating heavily. Analysts debated the real meaning behind certain phrases in the letter. TV commentators read between every line, linking Diana's words to recent royal events, including Harry and Meghan's departure and Catherine's ongoing battle with the public eye. Every sentence Diana wrote seemed to echo through current royal headlines. Even supporters of the monarchy were divided. Some defended the institution, urging privacy and respect. Others demanded accountability, calling on palace officials to address the letter and explain why it was withheld. Protesters even gathered outside Kensington Palace, holding signs that read, "She deserved better," and "Let Diana's truth be heard." Through it all, William remained silent, but his silence spoke volumes. It told the world this wasn't a PR stunt. This wasn't political. This was personal. And that only made the public lean in closer. They respected his grief, but they were also watching him closely, waiting to see what the future king would do next. "She always told the truth," one woman said in an interview. "Now, 27 years later, she's still the only one brave enough to say it." The media storm didn't die down. It evolved. Podcasts dissected every detail. Historians called for a re-examination of Diana's final years. And once again, the royal family found itself exactly where it never wanted to be, on trial in the court of public opinion. And as the noise grew louder, the letter itself took on new meaning, not just as a personal message, but as a piece of living history, a reminder that even in silence, Diana's voice had power, and no one could stop it from being heard. What it tells us about Diana's love and wisdom. What made Diana's letter unforgettable wasn't just what she said, but how she said it. Her words weren't formal or rehearsed. They were raw, deeply human, and written by a mother who loved beyond tradition or duty. She wasn't writing as royalty, she was leaving behind something stronger than a crown, a compass. Her wisdom didn't come from protocol. It came from pain. Diana had endured betrayal, isolation, and public humiliation, yet never lost her grace. In this letter, that strength showed. She didn't beg to be remembered. She simply gave what she always gave: unfiltered love wrapped in quiet courage. One line in particular stood out. you'll be told who you are. But never forget who you were before the crown touched your head. It was a warning and a gift. A way to protect William's humanity in a world that often demanded he hide it. She wasn't asking him to run from responsibility, but to meet it with integrity and heart. Diana also reminded him that real strength lies in compassion. She'd been criticized for being too emotional, too visible, but that very openness made her iconic. She made sure William understood that empathy is power, not weakness. She even acknowledged her own flaws, writing of times she'd been too loud or too afraid. But through it all, her focus never wavered, protecting her children. For William, the letter brought more than memories. It brought clarity, a reminder of why she mattered, and why no one has ever replaced her. This wasn't just a message, it was a blueprint, a quiet call to lead differently, and a final act of love that now lives on through him. William and the children, a family united by purpose. At Adelaide Cottage, far from cameras and public ceremonies, the real impact of Catherine's role is felt, not through headlines, but in the quiet strength of her family. When King Charles's unexpected tribute aired, William received an early transcript. Friends say he read it silently until he reached the line, "Thanks to my daughter." That's when something shifted. He didn't say much, but his eyes were wet. You could see the pride all over his face, shared one insider. William had long watched Catherine carry the weight of duty through illness, recovery, and relentless public scrutiny without asking for praise. Now she was being recognized as more than a royal consort. She was being seen as the monarchy's steadying force. Even the children noticed. When George heard the speech mentioned on the news, he asked, "Did Grandpa really say that about Mum?" William smiled and replied, "Yes," and he meant every word. Later, George, Charlotte, and Louis made thank you cards addressed to Auntie Jiggy's Aussie friends, filled with crayon hearts and little flags. But beyond the sweetness, something deeper was unfolding. The family was finding strength through purpose. William and Catherine now review diplomatic plans together, not for optics, but as a true team. In 2026, Catherine is set to lead a Sydney summit on global family resilience, while William expands his Earthshot initiatives across Oceania. At home, they remain focused on grounding their children. School walks, family dinners, and bedtime stories haven't changed. They want their kids to know that service starts at home, not in the throne room, said a friend. Together, they're not just the future of the monarchy. They're its present and its purpose. The future of the monarchy. Catherine's era begins. For years, the future of the British monarchy felt uncertain, debated, doubted, and questioned at every turn. But by September 2025, all that changed. The answer became clear. And that answer, for many, is Catherine. Not for her titles, not for tradition, but because she's done something rare. She earned trust. Political experts now call her the UK's soft power secret weapon. Australia even cited Catherine as direct inspiration for new national policy, the first time a British royal has influenced real-world legislation. And it didn't come through pomp. It came through grace. Recent polls across Commonwealth nations show a surge in approval, not just from monarchists, but from former Republicans who once pushed for full separation. One Australian analyst put it simply, Catherine didn't just win hearts. She made the monarchy feel useful again. Behind palace walls, King Charles reportedly feels more at peace than ever. She leads with empathy. And in today's world, that's more powerful than any throne. said one senior aide. For the first time, a woman not born royal, but shaped by love and duty, is becoming the monarchy's guiding voice, not through control, but through connection. This isn't a campaign, it's a transformation. The monarchy is no longer just about tradition, it's about relevance. From classrooms to climate summits, Catherine is leading by example, sincere, steady, and deeply human. No new titles were needed, but something bigger has shifted. History will remember Charles as the king who planted the seeds, but Catherine is the one who made them grow. The age of pageantry is fading, and in its place, an era of purpose. This letter wasn't just ink on paper. It was Diana's final gift, a voice from the past, guiding her son into the future. As William wipes away tears, one truth remains. Her love never left. And now, that love may change the monarchy forever. Her words will never be silenced again.